So I'm Lars R. Anderson, and my father was Reynold L. Anderson, and his father was Arthur R. Anderson. So he started the business. My grandfather did. My dad took it over after the Second World War, and I worked here intermittently in my youth and through high school years, and came back into the business in 1981 as a full-time employee.
What in 1981 brought you back?
Sure. Well, it's the same thing. It's the same reason Grandpa started the business, the same reason Dad came back, the same reason your father came back, my brother, and the same reason I came back, which is we found that we can't work for other people. Okay? That we think we know better, we think we know a different way, we think our way is the way to do it, and that is okay in some situations, but there's some situations. When I worked at Sears Roebuck, they called me in one time and said, "What does it say over the door when you come into this building?" And I was like, I don't know what you're asking me. He goes, "What does it say over the door?" And I'm like, customer satisfaction guaranteed. What? He goes, "No, it says Sears Roebuck. It doesn't say Lars Anderson over the door." And I'm like, I think I need to move on. Okay, because really it should say Lars Anderson over the door. So, so that's really kind of the gist of it. I mean, I had a job that was an on-the-road job. I had small children at home, and I was on the road. I left Monday morning, and I had a 7-state area in the upper Midwest selling ceramic tile during a building downturn. Ooh. And it was just time to move on. It was not a very good thing. It wasn't good for the family. It wasn't good for anything. And Dad happened to be turning 65 and taking Social Security at the time, and was like, well, if there was ever a time to come back, now would be the time. Leaf, your dad was already in the business at that time. He'd already left the insurance business, and so it was just time to do that. For my dad, he had worked at the Merchandise Mart. He'd worked at a bank in Evanston, and ultimately realized the same thing. And Grandpa had closed the store during the war years, and so when my dad came back, he didn't immediately reopen it. And then, but I mean, we've had this conversation, and he was like, "Yeah, I just needed to not work for them when I needed to work for myself." So, that's kind of what it was. And it was the same thing with Grandpa. I mean, he worked for Kranz Candies in Chicago, and ultimately was like, he saw the opportunity to come and start his own business, and he got a gift of chocolate from Bachman's at that time. This guy's like, "See what you can do with this, and if you can do it, keep going." And here we are over 100 years later, So we can't work for other people. I want to say one qualifier. Not that we're not good employees, okay? We do our job, but sometimes our attitude rubs management the wrong way, even though we do our jobs just fine.
What did you do when you re-entered?
So I would say that I, as always with a small business and a family business, ultimately, all of us have to be a jack of all trades to a certain extent, So I did a little bit of everything, but Leaf never had that much interest in dipping as much, so I dipped chocolates. I learned to dip chocolates, and so I did that. So there were things that I could do. It's kind of a funny thing, because there's also that part of our, and when I say our, I'm speaking of all of us here in the room that are, that I think, maybe I'm not speaking for all of you, but I think I am, that we like to challenge ourselves with certain things. And so I, at the time I was learning to dip, we didn't quite have the same situation we had here. We had a dipping table set up back in the kitchen in the molding room now, and other things. And then sometimes I would sit here, and it would be like this would be so much easier if I was left-handed. So I taught myself to dip left-handed. So I could dip left or right-handed,
Oh, wow.
depending on where I was sitting. Okay, but that I have to give your dad credit for, because when we were children, he had this kind of macabre fear that what if something happened? What if we were in a car accident and we lost a hand or we lost something? What could we do? So we learned to throw left-handed or right-handed. We learned to bat left or right-handed.
wow.
We learned to write. I can write left or right-handed. Okay, and we worked on it. You know, so that was kind of a challenge. So that the dipping presented that challenge to me, so I could do that. But cooking, I always loved. I liked that chemistry aspect of it. I liked that formulation and what's really happening here. What's changing the sugar molecules? You know, what's making this gritty and this smooth, and knowing and understanding that. And so I did that. You probably can't tell, but I'm gregarious and outgoing. And so I also liked working in the store, okay? Mm-hmm. The job I have now. Mm-hmm. It's one of my greatest strengths at the golf course, is being the front, the face for the golf course, to interact with the customers and talk and make jokes and do all that. So I don't think there's something that I didn't like. I liked it all. But, I mean, again, we've all cooked, we've all spent time. It's really great to be back in the cooking room and turn on the music you want or turn on the TV you want and be in your own world and do that too. So I certainly enjoyed that. So no, I don't think I could pick one thing out that say that was that, you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Going back now to like little boy Lars.
Yeah.
I know you and Dad lived here for a very short while. Do you have any memories of when you guys lived upstairs here?
You know, the only real memory I have is a visual one, which is the spot that you didn't paint in the children's playroom of the old circus wallpaper. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I remember that, and just because then that was always there too, even as I got older and we moved away.
Yeah.
I lived here when I was, I think by about the summer of my second birthday, it's a June birthday, we moved into the house on Gulf Avenue. So it was only 2 years. I wasn't really that old to have real memories of the property or playing in the yard or that kind of stuff.
Did Arthur still live here, or where was?
Yeah. So at that time, he lived in the apartment next door.
Okay. Because that was built in the 40s.
It was always there.
Okay.
So I feel like it was. There was a period of time where they lived here in this house and rented that out to the postmaster in town, Stanley Alm. So I believe by the time I was born, they were living here in the upstairs, what's now the office and all that upstairs, because they were renting that out for supplemental income.
Okay.
I think they built it initially for that idea, or I'm not sure why they built it. It's possible they built it thinking Dad or Aunt Sis or somebody would move in there.
Yeah,
you know.
That's what Dad had mentioned before, was he thought they built it for more rental income.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they, when I was, Grandma Gertrude was stricken with Parkinson's disease when I was young. And she passed away when I was 5. So most of my memories of her are in the storeroom, where she had a bed in. Well, that was the living room, and they had curtains around the bed, and she was bedridden, and that was kind of it. I didn't have. There's pictures of me as like a 2 or 3 year old where she was still walking and holding my hand and pushing me in the buggy, but not that. And then. After she passed away, I'm not sure how many years later, Grandpa remarried Beulah, and they lived here in this part. And so I have remembrances of coming here. I can say this now because she's passed. She couldn't cook at all. Beulah couldn't cook at all. And we always had Thanksgiving here.
Oh.
And I couldn't bear it. She was a wonderful lady. She taught me to play canasta. She taught me to play pinochle. She taught me lots of other things, Russian bank, lots of card games. and she was a wonderful person, but she couldn't cook at all. I mean, if you've ever seen the Aunt Bee's Pickles episode of Mayberry RFD or Andy Griffith's show, yeah, that was it. We nodded our head and smiled, and all that did was encourage her to cook more. So, and it's terrible when you have a mother like Violet, my mother, who was a great cook.
Yes.
Okay, so
You
it
know
was
what
just
you're
like, why
missing.
can't we have Thanksgiving at our house?
Was Arthur working in the business when you were like grade school age, like a kid?
So he did very occasionally little bit of things. He would come down once in a while and kind of oversee. He didn't really pour the kettles or move the boxes or do anything like that. He occasionally would come out and wait on a customer or so. Sometimes, like sure you have, and certainly I have, people who knew us, and they would come in the store and they would go, "Oh, is Arthur here?" You know, well, then he would come out and they would get him out. And
do you remember what Arthur, was there a part of the business Arthur seemed more interested in or proud of or good at in your memories?
Well, I think, this is just me speculating now,
Yeah.
because I'd never had a conversation about this with him or really with Dad. I think that he was driven by the idea of doing his own thing, okay? And so I think that he liked, my impression would be that he liked the idea of having overseen the whole thing, of having created this business and running it, because he didn't, although I know he could dip, he never sat down and dipped for production purposes like Tracy does or like I did or anything else. But there were times where he would sit down and say, "This is how you do it," to one of the people that was, were working there at that time. I don't want it done that way. I want it done this way. And he would show them. Okay. And he would occasionally do that. He would stop in and we'd be cooking something and he would make a comment or look over and nod his head, or he would say, "Well, I think you should do this, not that," or "Are you paying attention to this?" Just kind of that kind of thing. But he mostly was hands off, most of that, because really Dad was there. And I think that he wanted to have Dad be in charge. I don't think he wanted to have Dad think that he was overseeing him, So,
do you think that affected the way Reynold worked with you and Dad?
So Dad was more of he wasn't as analytical as I think your dad, Leaf, or I were, as much as he was just follow the process. Okay, this is the process, this is the instructions, these are this. So when I was developing the Lars bar, okay, there was a kind of a side look of where we're going off the track here a little bit from Dad, and I'm like, well, we're just going to try something. We're just going to try something different, So it was, so he was much more stick with the process kind of person. So I think that was good to give us a basis. But then I think both, Leaf's interest in the chemistry and my interest in the chemistry aspect of it took it to an area where anybody, at least in my experience, whether they're a chef or a candy maker or a baker or whatever, the more you understand about the chemistry of that, the better you are at creating things that taste good and are unique. Okay, even though some of those people may not truly understand the molecules and the combinations, they do understand the rising of the yeast or the timing of this or the whatever, So I think that Dad was just a very much follow the process kind of guy, and that gave us a good foundation of follow the process, because there are times, I can remember a couple of times where we would be having trouble with something. Maybe we were getting, the buttercream was getting too grainy. And so we would go back to, I don't even know if we still have that original cookbook that Was it Rogers?
Yes,
Yeah.
I believe it's upstairs in our
so
cabinet.
we would go back and we would look through those pages for a minute and reread it again and say, okay, where are we rushing it? Where are we hurrying it? Where are we not giving it enough time, or what are we doing?
Yeah.
You know, or where are we waiting too long and now it got too cold? And we would just kind of fine tune something like that. It doesn't happen very often. Buttercream comes to mind as the most common thing. And we found, for example, there was a period of time we couldn't get confectioner's AA sugar, and we just got regular refined cane sugar and had a terrible time with graininess because of the impurities that aren't taken out in the single refined sugar that are taken out in the double refined sugar. But it took us a while to understand that that's what was happening, and we just weren't going to get any better results till we could get the AA sugar again, you know. And it was some kind of a shortage. I don't remember what caused the shortage, but we just couldn't get it for a while. And so it doesn't make as much of a difference in caramel, for example. And even the regular creams, you know, the white creams, it doesn't make as much a difference as it did in the buttercream for whatever reason. So that's the one thing that I can think of where we were like, go back to the basics, follow this, check your steps, let's get this right.
When you were little, your mom didn't work in the business,
Right.
right? It was until you were older that
Right.
she worked with. How would you describe Violet's role in the shop, with the shop?
She kept the train on the tracks.
Okay.
That's what her role was. Okay? And it's interesting. I mean, even though she didn't work in the business when we were little kids, she raised us. She was a stay-at-home mom. She was a cub master, you know, and she was a Sunday school teacher and a lot of different things. But her mom, Grandma, my grandma, her grandma, you know, your great-grandma, worked in the business and kind of was her eyes. Because things would come up at dinner that must have happened at work that Mom couldn't know about, but they would get discussed at dinner because Grandma saw something, and so Mom would casually ask Dad about dinner about, well, so that, what's her name? You know, she was doing this, and my dad would be like, well, oh yeah, that's right. You know. So Grandma was very much involved, so it was very good that way. But then, so I guess it was probably by the time we were both in high school, I think then she was like, okay, time for me to do something else. They're grown. And so she learned to dip. And she'd always been involved in, like, when we would go into Chicago for trips for supplies, we would go in as a family and just load up the back of the station wagon with supplies. And then it was one of the things that actually was a very interesting part of my upbringing, because when you think of the 50s, okay, and even the early 60s, there was a whole lot of people in Richmond that were like, you went into Chicago?
Yeah.
You went into Chicago? You know, and it was like, yeah, we go into Chicago all the time, you know. And if we could do it and we could arrange it, we could go to a Cubs game, or we could go to a museum, or we could go to the Art Institute, or we did all those things. So in an odd way, it was a very cultural, expansive education for me to have that family trip for supplies into the city, you know. And it was something that really, much later when we got the big white van and I would go in and I would go pick up supplies and do that kind of stuff, that it was, I missed it because I was alone. It wasn't like there was a family to share it with. I didn't go in, you know, the kids were smaller and we weren't going in and doing that. And so, I mean, not to say we certainly went to Cubs games and stuff in the summer.
But it wasn't part of the supply run for
part of the supply
gelatin
run.
And
yeah, because
nuts.
it wasn't the family station wagon.
Yeah.
Now it was a business vehicle. She kept Dad on task. She kept employees on task. Dad was not by any means I'm going to use the word confrontational, but my mother wasn't confrontational, but she was direct.
Yes.
Okay. So if somebody wasn't doing what she thought they should be doing, her job became to point that out. And Dad didn't have to do that then. And I think he relished that. I think he was happy to have her on board for that very reason, because it just wasn't his strength, you know. And so, And she always felt invested in the business. I think even when she didn't work here, it was always the family business, our business. It was never referred to as anything but that. It wasn't your dad's business. It was never that. She never thought about that. Or Grandpa's business, or his, it was never that. It was always our business. So.
Yeah. Did becoming a father yourself change the way you thought about your work here, or being in the business, or the Anderson's candy shop?
I never really gave that any thought. There's a lot of layers to this. Certainly, the advantages, we all know of the advantages of working for yourself, small business. Even Ellen, my current wife, knows the advantages of a family business. In her case, the insurance business. But so it was nice to have that flexibility, that I could arrange to leave work to be at a baseball game or whatever. So that was certainly a factor. I mean, when we left Minnesota and moved back here, and I came to work and the kids came to work, and we lived for a while in the apartment, right here. So they got to experience that as well, and then we lived just up past the grade school. And so it was handy. It was nice that we were there, and I think for me, especially since, Adrian's mother and her parents lived in town, and so that was very nice to come back to Richmond so that my kids had the same thing I had, which was both sets of grandparents in the same town. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I think I really relished the idea of coming back, because I know what that did for me, having both sets of grandparents influencing me, and I think my kids would echo that same thing, that having both sets of grandparents here in town was a very positive thing for them, and having that flexibility, to be able to be scoutmaster or coach a baseball team or whatever, and so those are things that wouldn't have happened if I was still working for Sears, So I think in that sense, yes, there was that I look forward to. But Dad, he routinely said, don't take over the business. Don't do this.
Yeah.
Okay. Another trait of not listening to advice from other sources than ourselves. Obviously, Leaf came back, then I came back, and things are different, so much different in the world today, it's, and you certainly know how hard it is to run a small family business. And,
yes.
And so the advice might still be the same. Don't do this.
Run.
Right, exactly. But there's certainly advantages to it, Now, and Adrian's been lucky enough to have some of that same advantage, even though he's not worked for himself. Mm-hmm. He's been in a position with his jobs where he could coach his kids' teams and be involved and do that kind of stuff. And ultimately, I think that's, whether it was this business or his business or the insurance business or whatever, it's just a nice benefit to have,